Thank you all for joining us. We will get started momentarily. We're just giving folks a minute or so to get logged in. If you do have any initial questions, feel free to use the Q&A box. Just a few more folks getting logged in, I see, and then we'll get started momentarily. Thank you all for joining us today. I will now turn it over to ASH Executive Director, Laurent Hubert.
Thank you, Megan. So welcome and thank you, all of you, for joining us today for this webinar about the world's first lesson from the Santa Cruz County filter ban, where you will hear from the advocates involved in the first cigarette filter ban, which was passed in Santa Cruz, California, in the United States. And this topic of banning cigarette filters is getting traction. So it's being discussed in the context of the UN Treaty to End Plastic Pollution, where ASH and partners around the world are promoting the concept of banning cigarette filters, with the WHO recommending an immediate ban on cigarette filters, also in the context of those treaty negotiations on a treaty to end plastic pollution. Also, the tobacco treaty, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, in its last rounds of negotiations at the 10th Conference of the Party, adopted an article on the health article of the treaty, which is Article 18, which clarifies that cigarette filters are single-use toxic plastics that should be banned. And also some countries, like even the European Union, in the context of the EU Single-Use Plastic Directive, is considering the topic. And some countries like Belgium are considering it. But to date, only Santa Cruz has done it. So this first jurisdiction is Santa Cruz being the first one to pass a cigarette filter ban is really a statement and a hope that other local and state and even national jurisdictions will adopt similar measures to protect human health as well as the health of the environment. So we have today two panelists who were involved in the Santa Cruz filter ban, and they will do two presentations that will be then followed by Q&A. For the Q&A, feel free to address them to any of the panelists and use the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. So we'll go straight to the presentations. I want to introduce Tara Leonard, who's the project director of the Tobacco Education and Prevention Program at the Santa Cruz County Health Services Agency, where she has worked since 2014. She has been a tireless advocate for tobacco product waste policy, highlighting the critical partnership between public health and environmental sustainability. We can thank her for helping make this first finger ban a reality. And she will explain how a coalition worked to pass this first ban of the sale of filtered tobacco products. Tara, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here today. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, so this is where I would normally start with maybe a half an hour on all the reasons why cigarette butts are such a horrible thing for our planet and why we have to get rid of them. But the assumption is that most of the people on this call pretty much have that background, right? So we know all this, that it's the most littered item on the planet, that it's a blight, that it's microfiber plastic pollution, that it's toxic. Great, I can spend a half an hour talking to our policymakers, going into detail about each of these issues. And when I do, what is frequently said to me in response is, well, you know, there's always unintended consequences, and this is what we need to do to keep our smokers healthy. And that's when you hit them with what we all know, that in fact, cigarette filters have no benefit in preventing the adverse health effects of smoking. Again, this is a long and involved issue, and I think that Dr. Novotny is going to talk about this a little bit more. He has geniusly called this the filter fraud. And the filter fraud is absolutely critical in passing local policies. We need more and better understanding about this, and we have to educate the public about this. This is the #1 reason that Assemblymember Mark Stone here in California was not able to pass a filter ban in 2013 and 2015 and 2018, because there's a misunderstanding about this issue. Okay, it's terrible for you. Filters don't even work. So surely the tobacco industry is doing something to take care of this issue. No, they're not taking any responsibility at all. The tobacco industry takes no responsibility for the environmental impacts of its products, just like it takes no responsibility for the health impacts of its products. The fancy way of saying this is that they externalize their costs, forcing the physical and financial burden of tobacco waste onto government agencies and volunteer organizations. The simple way of saying that is local taxpayers are paying to clean up corporate toxic waste. And are these the people that we want cleaning up corporate toxic waste? Children, volunteers, and the most vulnerable? This is a picture of the Downtown Streets team, which is an organization here in Santa Cruz that helps homeless people, and in exchange, they do city beautification. Is this really an appropriate equity issue? And is this who we want cleaning up corporate toxic waste? Personally, I don't think so. But as we know, current efforts around this issue rely on what in public health we refer to as downstream solutions. We try to treat the problem after it exists instead of preventing the problem. So these are things like garbage cans and no smoking signs and education campaigns. And the industry loves this. Of course they love it. It removes them from all responsibility. And instead, it puts the onus on individual behavior change, AKA blame the consumer. When what we really want to do is put in place policy and systems change that make the producer of the waste bear the responsibility. So understanding all of this, the Public Health Department here in Santa Cruz County started working on tobacco product waste back in 2017. These are just a few pictures of the types of things that we did, and this is a very grassroots campaign. So we were in schools talking to high schoolers, we were at environmental events, we were doing cleanups, we were doing art activities. And I cannot focus enough or emphasize enough that your cleanups are critical. Cleanups are more than picking up garbage. Make them data collection. Make sure that when you are doing tobacco waste cleanups, that you're noticing, are these filters 10 feet from a garbage can? Are they 10 feet from a no smoking sign? Are they 10 feet from an outdoor dining establishment? Are they 10 feet from a tobacco retailer? This is important data when you're going in front of policymakers and they're pushing back on certain things. Cleanups are also a way to attract the media, and they're also a way to engage the community. And it's the only way you're going to get the local data that you need. We all have heard this 4.5 trillion number. That's great. But when you're talking to a small jurisdiction like Capitola on the shores of the Monterey Bay, they want to know what's going on in their city. So if you can, bring that data down to a very personal and local level. And that was part of our data and science-driven approach here in Santa Cruz County. You cannot go in front of county and policymakers and say, we want to do this. You have to support it, and you can't just support it with the butts that you've picked up. We were also doing key informant interviews. We were doing public intercept surveys, and we were lucky enough to be supported by other data from organizations here in Monterey, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and of course, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who did a study that looked at 5 years of tobacco waste on the shores of Monterey Bay. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, they discovered an astounding 24.5% of that litter was from smoking. So we were able to use data from national organizations working locally as well. We also did mapping, and we looked at a lot of different policies around the world. And provide resources. When we started this work, none of the resources on this page even existed, but now we have incredible partners like the Public Health and we have the Public Health Law Center that put together this incredible tobacco waste toolkit. We have Dr. Novotny's white paper. Make sure that when you're working with policymakers, make it clear that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of this work has already been done. and critical to quantify the local financial burden. Again, Dr. Novotny at the Center for Tobacco and the Environment at San Diego State have created this incredible model that communities can use. They can plug in their data. So working with the Santa Cruz Public Health Department and Public Works Department, we provided that data. And they gave us an estimate that the city of Santa Cruz spends over $2 million a year on the mitigation of tobacco waste. So when you're council members come back to you and say, oh, but we're going to lose X, Y, Z money in taxes on these products, you can say, really? Are you going to lose $2 million? Because otherwise you're up. Engaging the media. Don't just rely on paid media. Use your earned media. Earned media is things like letters to the editor, op-eds, social media. You want to make sure that you're getting out there ahead of this messaging, particularly around the two critical issues around the filter fraud and around the fact that the industry is doing nothing about it. And this is another one that we found really effective at a local level, art and visual aids. You can show studies, you can put up data, you can talk about your numbers all you want. But one of the most effective things that we found are some of the things on this slide. We had an event at the Museum of Art and History where we invited youth to come in and create messages that they would want to share with policymakers. And we have used those at every cleanup since. Use visual aids like this absolutely heart-wrenching photo that someone took at a beach, Karen Mason took at a beach in Florida, of a black skimmer bird feeding tobacco waste to their chicks. And then up in the right-hand corner, this thing has been incredible. This is 25,000 tobacco butts that were picked up in Santa Cruz just in 2 months by that downtown streets team that I mentioned. We bring this thing into policymaker meetings and their mouths hang open. You're helping people to see a problem that is frequently simply overlooked. And this is the activity where we took those butts that we built at the Museum of Art and History, we had a cleanup, and for every cigarette butt that you picked up, you put one of these larger than life butts in the ground. So by the end of the cleanup, it was just this sea of cigarette butts, making this frequently overlooked issue highly visible. Whoops. I don't know what that is. Okay, policy meetings. Don't wait until you have a policy to go to policy meetings. Go early, go often, take youth, take your advocates. When you do a cleanup, go to public comment, bring your butts with you, get yourself in front of policymakers. If you can't get in front of a city council, get in front of the community, the Commission on the Environment, get in front of Fish and Wildlife, get in front of youth, get in front of whatever commission policy you can start to build those relationships over time. And identify your non-traditional community partners. This is a completely different area for public health. You are really reaching out to your environment. And so no matter where you live, you don't have to live in a coastal community to have city beautification groups or storm management or zoos, aquariums. Make sure that you're thinking creatively about shared goals across these different types of organizations. We were extremely lucky in Santa Cruz that early on we made connections with places like the Cigarette Surfboard and Save Our Shores, and they have been true blue advocates on this issue for the last 8 years. And then along came COVID and everything went out the window and everybody was busy and nobody was interested. Do not give up. We realized, okay, you're not ready for a policy yet. Let's write a resolution where at least you acknowledge that cigarette butts are a public health and environmental threat. And so by 2024, all 5 of the jurisdictions in the county of Santa Cruz had done that. And when the Board of Supervisors did that, they did 3 really important things. They created an ad hoc committee to look at this issue. They specified a deadline to come back to the board with a policy, and they committed to contacting the other jurisdictions to urge collaborative action. So no one was working on this alone. And this woman right here is Monica Morales, and she is the director of the entire health services agency. And the reason I invited her to this meeting is I wanted this to be clear that this wasn't just tobacco coming to you and asking for some sort of policy. It was a link to our larger county and public health strategic plans around health and wellness and environmental sustainability and health equity. Skip that. So what did the ad hoc committee do? We looked at a policy evaluation process, and I'm not going to go over all of these things, but you can see that there's a variety of policy options that different jurisdictions are looking at. And we took our criteria and our data to figure out which of these policy options were going to have the most impact on our litter reduction, that we could enforce, that had public support, that had the least impact on tobacco retailers in the jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. This was a very long and involved process. And of course, part of it was leveraging community knowledge. The city of Santa Cruz conducted a bilingual TPW survey, and they found that over 90% of respondents would support these policies. And we also gave them the list here of all of the different policies under consideration, and prohibiting the sale of single-use cigarette filters was the #1 policy for survey respondents. So now we can go back to those council members and say, hey, you have the support of your jurisdictions, and this is the policy that they want to see. And remember, part of this is that cigarette use is trending down. According to the 2022 California Health Interview Survey, only 6% of adults currently are using cigarettes, and even fewer youth, which would be the future of cigarette use, are using cigarettes. And policymakers always want to know about the dollars. And so we calculated the impact that we assumed this would have on local sales tax revenue by looking back at what had happened when we had banned the sale of flavored tobacco products in the county. And it is true that in the first 6 months, we saw this 3.1 decline, but then that not only rebounded, but rebounded by double-digit increases. And so this is an example of how the market will readjust as the people who are using one product move on to a different product. And we carefully crafted policy language. I think a lot of you have seen our final language, and you have to know we went back and forth for weeks with a super helpful Public Health Law Center and our county council. And there's 2 things I want to point out about this language. The term partially inconsumable cigarette or cigar was very intentional to avoid perpetuating some sort of industry myth of harm reduction about these filters, and that there's very broad material language. This bans the sale of a single-use filter, whether it is made of any material, including but not limited to, and you can see the list, and it includes biodegradable material, because we simply did not want to have this unreliable industry turn around and say, ta-da, we've created this biodegradable filter. Well, 1, sure you have. We probably can't trust you. But 2, even if you had, so what? That's just going to give people an excuse to throw these things on the ground. We know that filters don't work. We don't need them. And then the other big pushback we got locally is, won't smokers just get these products online? And luckily, we were once again supported by the state. There's an assembly bill that just went into effect on January 1 that basically says that any provision in a local tobacco retail license has to apply with equal force to online and delivery sales, which means you can't mail those products into that jurisdiction either. Thank you, State of California. Connect your supporters to policymakers. I can't say this enough. One-on-one meetings, letters, op-eds, signed petitions. We had more than 36 speakers at the first Board of Supervisors meeting. You can see in this picture, they're out the door. And sure enough, on October 8th, the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to ban the sale of filtered tobacco products. There was, however, a caveat that it shall begin enforcing on January 1 of 2027, or on a date that 2 additional jurisdictions approve a similar ordinance, whichever date is later, which means that we have moved on to those 2 other jurisdictions. So the city of Santa Cruz is currently conducting its work through its Health and All Policies Committee, and the agenda item is tentatively scheduled for June 10th. And in the city of Capitola, they have voted unanimously to draft a filter sales ban and bring it back for a first reading this summer. So the work goes on. We're not done yet. And this is an example. This is a photo of our cigarette surfboard team along with our Save Our Shores team. We put on a big movie premiere with a Q&A and a panel and local policymakers. And that's where we are right now. I mean, that was a tried and true, super fast.
Thank you
I'm going to
so much.
stop sharing.
This is a wonderful presentation on the efforts that have gone so far into making this happen, and because it's still quite a lot work needs to be done to get to the next phase. If anyone has questions, you can start using the Q&A to address the questions. But we'll get to them after Tom's presentation. So our next speaker is Dr. Tom Novotny, Professor Emeritus of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at San Diego State University and School of Public Health. He's the founder also of Cigarette Butts Pollution Project And he's also an expert who's been working with WHO on this topic. And he will discuss how this important local environmental policy efforts intersects with ongoing local, national, and international tobacco control interventions. So Tom, the floor is yours.
All right, let me get my slides up here if I can. Hold on. Let me get to the right ones. All good on the slides? Hello?
No, I don't see your
Not yet.
slides.
Oh, let's see here. Oh, am I not doing it right here? You know what? I don't know why it's not picking up on the share because I'm hitting the share and it's sitting
Do you
there.
want me to share your slides, Tom?
Yeah, go ahead because we don't want to
Yeah, so we
screw this up here. Okay.
Just give me 1 second to move these windows. Are you all able to see my slides or Tom's slides on my computer?
yeah, a dark
I don't see them. Oh, there
we
they
go.
are. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, so yeah, I just want to say congratulations and send my admiration to Tara. I mean, what they've done, I think, is a gold standard of multi-dimensional advocacy and community-based public health. And it's just really amazing to see how comprehensive their approach has been to a local public health issue that has implications far beyond, I think, the shores of Santa Cruz County. At any rate, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this fits in the contextual sort of environment in which this is now happening. And it's a difficult environment for public health, as you all know, from what's going on in our nation's capital. It spills over into the state and local environments for sure, but this is really owned by a local environment activity, a local jurisdiction, and I think that makes it an example rather than an exception as to what should be going on. So next slide, please. Next slide, Carol, or rather Megan, yeah, Megan, I think, Scott. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. Tara mentioned some of the things. The tobacco prevention program of the state. This is part of their their suggested activities that they fund at the local level. In other words, they put some strategic expectations into the funding that is transferred down from the local level or from the state levels to the local level from tobacco control. Undo.org is a great website. It does have a lot of connections to research and articles and things that we've provided, as well as the state's actual expectations for this particular part of tobacco control. The flavored tobacco bans, that was something that Tara mentioned. And they're a sort of a model. I mean, this is a restriction on the sale of certain products, just as the restriction on the sale of filtered cigarettes would be. There's something called the Trash Amendment to the Clean Water Act here in California, which means that nothing greater than 5 millimeters, which would mean a cigarette filter actually is only about that. It's about it's more than 5 milliliters for sure, cannot go into the storm drain system because of the protection of the oceans that's implied by trying to keep trash out of the storm drains. The Ocean Protection Council, which is a statewide kind of agency that's kind of semi-private, has come up with a microplastic strategy, and they recognize the importance of the microplastics from cigarette butts in particular, because there is data and evidence that these actually appear, the microplastics, cellulose acetate, in runoff from urban areas. For instance, in the San Francisco area, the Estuary Institute there, the study that showed the presence of the cellulose acetate, which is more than likely just due to cigarette butt waste. The disease research program here at the state level again, is an important resource that has taken on tobacco product waste, and they have funded our Center for Tobacco and the Environment. It's a 3-year grant that we hope will be renewed in a year or so, because I think we're making some progress on our objectives. But this is the first center on tobacco and related to the environment anywhere, and it's something I think the state again is taking a lead on. And this is funding that comes from our tobacco tax, so it's not federally related, although we've gotten some federal grants. But that's really the source of the funding is from the tobacco tax funded tobacco-related disease research program. Smoking bans on state beaches, that's something that passed a couple of years ago, and again, focused on tobacco product waste on those beaches. Local beaches took it on first. Many of those, Solana Beach was the first smoke-free beach in California, but now they are statewide. Local actions, some of these were mentioned, but the one I think is important to look at is Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach. Both these cities banned all tobacco product sales, and nobody died there as a result of that. And probably their economies, well, I know actually there have been some economic studies to show that their tax base was not affected by this as well. Bans on single-use plastics, plastic bags, cutlery, etc., like those things have been taken on at the local level. So this is not an unusual ask in terms of single-use plastics. Baltimore City, I'll say more about this, is suing the tobacco industries over tobacco product waste, and that's the first city to do that. So that'll be interesting to see how that turns out. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And there's a history of local clean and air policies that Laurent mentioned. Things happen at the local level, moving up to the state, moving farther than the state, and it's so the history of success really starts at the local level when it comes to tobacco policies. And then there's all the local bans at parks, beaches, neighborhoods, etc. Next slide, please. So yeah, Baltimore, almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago, well, actually more than 2 years, filed a lawsuit against cigarette manufacturers and a distributor about the evidence that they have found as a result of Mr. Trash Wheel there. There's several of these Mr. Trash Wheels actually that go around the Inner Harbor and other aquatic environments around Baltimore, picking up trash, and what they found was that cigarette butts are a significant proportion of the trash that's deposited in the bay, and as well on the beaches and the urban areas as well. And they were able to come up with a cost estimate and are suing on the basis of not just the cost of cleanup, but the fact that this is a defective product, that the companies had failed to warn about the plastics and that there was no instruction about how to dispose of these things safely. So their claim is mostly punitive, and that'll be interesting to see how this turns out. They've withstood several challenges to dismissal and moving up to federal court level. So far they've been successful, but again, it's a very slow moving process. Also a very expensive process. They are represented by a private law firm as well as their own in-house legal team, and it's going to be a very interesting outcome to see how this moves forward. Next slide, please. The international context, we've mentioned that a little bit. Now, there's a treaty that's been started up about 3 years ago now, negotiation under the United Nations Environment Program, and a group of us, anti-tobacco advocacy groups, banded together to try to get special attention paid to the plastic single-use plastic filter. And this will take, again, some time. International treaties are not fast-moving activities. There's been 5 meetings of I think 180 countries that have gotten together. Those who represent oil producing countries really are going to put up a lot of resistance to any kind of plastics treaty. Most of the plastic waste is from petroleum-based product, but this one in particular, we're hoping will be included as a single-use plastic, widely distributed, and has no, it's non-essential. It has no consumer purpose of any benefit. We've got the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control with an Article 18 that is focused on protecting the environment, and we are working on a report for the Secretary of the Framework Convention that will hopefully motivate the parties of the treaty to move forward on specific recommendations on the banning of the filter. The WHO also has a study group on tobacco product regulations, also considering the same issues. And the European Union has put forward at least a consideration of tobacco, the single-use filter, as something that can be controlled under their plastics directive, not necessarily under their tobacco control directive. So again, this is more of an environment focus rather than just the public health focus. Probably has more success along those lines, I think. National efforts, Laurent mentioned a couple of these, but there are some countries that have done an extremely good job of describing this issue. In Belgium, a Superior Health Council made a great case for banning the sale of filtered cigarettes. UK has banned single-use vapes. So there's some movement afoot. I'm glad Santa Cruz came out first, but these countries will probably do a better job in terms of moving on this. I think, I'm hopeful anyway. The non-governmental organizations internationally, there's a lot of effect. It's an interesting process, though, because the tobacco industry oftentimes likes to fund these international organizations to do volunteer cleanups, for instance. So it's been an interesting sort of consideration that part of the tobacco industry's greenwashing efforts means that they contribute to environmental groups. And when we talk to these environmental groups, I think they do oftentimes see the folly in that. But the Surfrider is an international organization. Sierra Club is. Ocean Conservancy have let go of their tobacco industry funding. And so they are also important groups on this. Again, environmentally oriented. Next slide, please. And then these issues, Tara's gone over some of them, the unintended consequences. This issue about the increase in health risk if we ban filtered cigarettes, because the filter is like, incorporated into the thinking about tobacco, about cigarettes. It's not a cigarette unless it has a filter. The word filter means that it's filtering, that it's actually functional. It's been difficult to, overcome this knowledge gap, but we've tried to do that with a small clinical trial. Again, that was bollocksed up by having COVID happen when we were trying to recruit and bring people in to do testing, etc. But our small clinical trial showed that there was no difference in the carcinogen and nicotine metabolism biomarkers for smokers who switch to unfiltered cigarettes. But the main thing is that there's plenty of evidence from the Surgeon General's reports and NCI that don't give any credence to the safety benefits of filters. The reduction in tax revenue is always going to be one of the tobacco industry's arguments, and I think the more we reduce cigarette smoking in general, the less that becomes a problem, or at least a concern. Small businesses losing income, they will bring forward arguments about this, and it's true that a lot of other sales depend on people coming in for their fast-moving consumer products, such as cigarettes, and there is that. But the answer to that is, let's find a way of helping them out. Switching to other products, of course, that will probably be something of an outcome, whether that means harm reduction or not. That's another presentation. So, but nevertheless, it's likely to happen. The economic industry issues, as I mentioned, they really do like to fund environmental groups. Philip Morris has got their website saying our world is not an ashtray. Focusing on extended producer responsibility, which is one environmental approach, but it can be abused when a country, for instance, or a city or wherever, invites the tobacco industry in to become part of the policy process. That should not happen because they are not stakeholders in this process. And along with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, there's an article in that Framework Convention that says, yeah, this must not happen, that there has to be a firewall between any of that kind of influence and any environmental work as well. So it's something that, we have to look at. I think the other thing that's important to understand is that these filters are not made by the tobacco company. They're made in partnership the cigarettes are made in partnership with Celanese and Eastman and other chemical companies, because these are chemical products not made by the tobacco industry. And so those industries may arise, in terms of resistance. We haven't really detected that yet. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yep. Counter arguments. I think we can pretty much understand what these are now. But one of them, I think that's important for people to understand, is that the use of the filter over the last 30 years or so has changed the cell type of lung cancer that has, results from cigarette smoking. It's now called adenocarcinoma, the most common cell type, whereas before there were filters, it was a different small cell carcinoma. Cancers have gone down because people have quit smoking, but the incidence of this particular kind of cancer has gone up, and it's because of the design of the cigarette, most likely due to the filter or the way the cigarette is made and attached to the filter. But the design of the cigarette has been the source of this increase in adenocarcinoma, which is a harder and I'll show you that slide in a second. At any rate, people will reflect on old studies that showed higher levels of disease from filter cigarettes, but these didn't take into account a lot of the cigarette design back then and compared to now. So at any rate, what we really hope, I think, is by changing this palatability and the attraction of the cigarette and correcting the filter fraud concept, that people are going to smoke less, going to quit smoking. That remains to be seen. We don't know for sure all the ramifications of that, but that's something I think we can expect as a result of changing the whole sort of design of the cigarette this way. They will come up with, quote, safer cigarettes. That's what their philosophy has been throughout their history, but there's not going to be anything safe about any kind of filtered cigarette, and including the eco filters or biodegradable filters, as Tara pointed out. Next slide, please. Get towards the end here. Yeah, this is just a graphic representation of the increase in adenocarcinoma, especially among women on the right side there, that has happened over the years since 1970. When filters became almost 100% on our cigarettes here in the United States, and more than 90% globally. So this is data from surveillance systems for cancer, and this is robust data, and it's certainly a strong piece of evidence that the filter has not protected people over the years with their effect on removing some of the tar and nicotine product from the combusted smoke. Next slide, please. So we got to get after this knowledge gap. I mean, I think that's an important thing. We've got surveys to show that people don't know about the plastic composition of the filter, and they don't know about the lack of protection that it provides. Philip Morrison has done their own surveys to show that this is the case, and that also a lot of their customers think that just tossing their butts on the ground is the right way to dispose of them. And that is the environmental argument that needs to be made about the single-use plastic cigarette butt. Next slide, please. So the biodegradable filters, not a solution. This oftentimes come up, and there's companies now that are producing and trying to partner with the tobacco industry. Green Butts is a real techie savvy company based in, I think, Latvia or some Lithuania perhaps, and they are going to try to solve the cigarette butt problem by building a biodegradable filter, which will make it less guilty feeling to toss your cigarette butts in the environment. So it doesn't really change anything in terms of the chemical contamination that also goes along with the deposition of cigarette butts in the environment. So no such thing as an eco cigarette or a recycling potential. The collection of enough cigarette butts to actually be effectively recycled, for instance, is just impossible to think about. The international coastal cleanups get about 1 million a year, and there's 5 trillion that are produced, and trillions of those end up as cigarette butts and unpicked up. Next slide, please. So the message is going forward that the cellulose acetate filter is a non-essential source of plastic toxic waste. The other tobacco products and vapes and ends also have hazardous waste attached to them. That's another set of discussions, but most of the tobacco product waste is still, by count at least, cigarette butts. Significant knowledge gaps about the function and composition of the filters. This needs clarity that it's fraudulent and it's not going to get any better depending on any kind of filter that is attached to the cigarette filter. It increases the risk for lung adenocarcinoma. And then environmental advocacy is really, I think, the key to this, and that I think is demonstrated wonderfully in Santa Cruz. The environmentalists really push this forward. And this will reduce tobacco use and tobacco product waste, at the same time denormalizing smoking and also any of the other products as well, while trying to hold the industry accountable in some cases at least. Next slide, please. So the Cigarette Surfboards, Tara mentioned this. This is a documentary film that's been going around the world. They constructed a series of surfboards out of cigarette butts that they collected from the beaches. It's an incredibly powerful message that talks about stewardship of the ocean and a consideration of tobacco as a major contaminant. And it's really, really a cool movie. I got a chance to say a few words in it. Next slide, please. And I just want to let you know we have the Center for Tobacco and the Environment. Got a website full of information and possibilities for connections. So I invite you to check that out at some point. So thank you very much for this opportunity to comment on
Thank you,
the
Tom.
success of Santa Cruz. Yep.
Comprehensive presentation. So we're going to go straight to the panel, and I'm going to also invite Chris Bostic, who's a policy director and an attorney at ASH, in case there are some legal questions. And I'm going to start with the questions from the audience, the live audience, but I also received questions before the webinar from the international community. Given the time, it was difficult for some people because it was the middle of the night. So I want to go first to a first question, actually, from someone from the Surfrider Foundation, and I think this is important because there's quite a lot of cases around the world where environmental groups, for one reason or the other, and sometimes with not malintent, but misguided partnerships with the tobacco industry, but organizations that can actually become partners with us. And so I think, Tom, you mentioned that the Surfrider Foundation may have received funding from the tobacco industry in the past.
No.
No, you didn't say that? Or Tara,
No,
did you?
Ocean Conservancy did.
Ocean Conservancy did. Okay.
Yeah, not
Okay.
Surfrider.
No, that did not happen. Okay. And Tara, you mentioned in your presentation that you were able to then get the environmental groups on board. How difficult was this, and how much did they end up owning the issue? And were there any cases of groups that may have had, maybe a misguided partnership with the tobacco industry in the past, like the ones you
Sure.
mentioned in the beginning, like, where they do cleanups, which is actually for
Sure.
corporate social
Yeah, I
responsibility.
mean, look,
And
not
they become
everybody
mutual partners.
not everybody lives this issue like Tom and I do 24/7 for decades. And so organizations like Ocean Conservancy, first of all, I have to come right out and say that my husband is the chief science officer for Ocean Conservancy, and he's been in that organization for almost 20 years now. So they did stop getting their tobacco funding. I'm not going to take credit for that, but they did. And so this is a slow process of educating these organizations. We all know that, particularly right now in this financial situation, this financial culture that we're in the United States, that funding is getting harder and harder for some of these environmental organizations. So I understand why, when they are given these opportunities by the tobacco industry, they might be tempted. But I think that the outreach that we've done, a lot of the messaging that's happening, those organizations are no longer doing that. And what happened in Santa Cruz is you have to make a distinction between your environmental organizations and your surf organizations. Those are actually two different groups of people with two different, they have a general understanding of a shared goal, but it actually is two different groups of organizations. And so we got most of the environmental organizations on board through the fact that my husband and I have lived here for 37 years and worked in this community and know those organizations. And we also had a very, very strong coalition partner in Rachel Kippen, who also was from the environmental side. The surf side, as Tom mentioned, we got those organizations on board through the Cigarette Surfboard. And they had literally just started their film project in 2017 as we had started our policy project. So we've gone through this process together over the last 8 years, and they really brought on board the surfing community. And I encourage you all to watch that film and see how they did that, because it's not just about tobacco waste, it's about global issues around ocean pollution.
Thank you for that. So here also, I think the message is that in some cases, some of those groups, they don't represent the industry. In all cases, they actually could become allies.
Absolutely. When
Way
you
to get them in
explain the
them.
cigarette filter fraud, when you explain the greenwashing, they're
Exactly.
kind of horrified, and they stop doing that.
I'll go to the next another question that was on what are your thoughts on the San Francisco, California extended producer responsibility? And I don't know anything about this, but just before you answer, I've spent a lot of time in Europe and in Spain and in France. We've had problems where actually applying an extended producer responsibility approach to tobacco products ended up creating a situation where then the responsibility and the onus of the cleanup was then put on the industry, allowing them to then use it for greenwashing and so on and so forth.
Totally.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thought about extended producer responsibility is that while it may be a solution for some types of tobacco products, it's never going to be a solution for cigarette butts. And all of our data showed that cigarette butts are what we're finding on our streets, our parks, and beaches. So if these are people that can't walk 10 feet to put a cigarette in a garbage can, they're not going to walk around carrying their cigarette butts in their pocket and take it back to the store. Again, the industry loves this idea. For a while there, they pushed the concept of individual ashtrays that people were going to carry around their cigarette butts. For God's sakes, that's never going to work in a million years. And we just have to be realistic about that. I can let Tom talk more about EPR. We tried some EPR policies early on, and it was very much a concern, as you said, that it's just an opportunity for greenwashing for the industry to say that they're making a difference, but they're not really making much of a difference.
Indeed, Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, San Francisco, as many people know, passed a litter fee. It was, I think it was 20 cents a pack back in 2010. It's now up to over $1.50 a pack because of inflation as well as programmatic needs. And that fee is designed to go rather than into the tax base or into the general fund. It's designed to fund some sort of a program for getting rid of cigarette butts. And that means educational activities. It means, I think they funded some cleanup at it, enforcement activities. It's not, it's administered by their environment department, not by the public health department. That has been underused. Of course, there was a huge reaction to that statewide with the tobacco industry and other groups passing a citizen initiative that says these fees are not just fees, they're really a tax, and so you should oppose them, and therefore you have to have 2/3 vote of the population to be able to pass one of these things.
Exactly.
So that hasn't been used, but I think it could be used. I mean, here in the state, we actually passed additional $2 pack tax a few years ago with the statewide initiative. So these things can happen, especially when the prevalence of smoking goes down. As Tara pointed out, people are not as resistant to this idea, especially if there is an economic reason to try to recover some of the costs. So that part of EPR, cost recovery, might not be such a bad idea. But as she points out also, and Laura, you know, in Spain and France, the industry has become part of the process where they basically, you know, can just excuse themselves by saying, you know, here's some money, use it to clean up things, and then we're going to be champions of the environment as a result of it. So it doesn't solve the problem. It mitigates some of the costs, but it doesn't solve the problem. That's where the policy against the filter itself should have much more effect, because it's upstream source reduction and not downstream mitigation.
So making them pay for it could be one solution, but better to just ban the filter.
Yeah, and the litter fee raises the price, of course, and that reduces consumption. So that's not all bad either.
Not a positive thing. I'll go then to another question from Amos Hausner. Is it realistic to require that all marketers, manufacturers of filter cigarettes will be required to post a bond for the expenses required for cleaning the filter waste?
Post a
Well,
bond. I think that just follows exactly what Tom is saying. We need to stop cleaning up garbage after it's on the ground. We need to stop the garbage from ever getting on the ground. And so what we've certainly focused on here in Santa Cruz is ending the sale of these products in the first place, rather than focusing on cleaning them up after the fact.
There's a question on the name of the movie, and maybe if that maybe a link to this information maybe could send to everyone. Maybe Megan can send that to everyone.
Sure. So it's just www.cigarettesurfboard.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
yeah, right now it's being seen in a lot of film festivals all around the world, and it's got some stars in it, like Jack Johnson, a famous singer, and there's some other people that are notable to the surf community for sure. And it's really they've been winning awards for it. It's really well done.
Then the ban is scheduled to go into effect on January 1st, 2027, but still depends on 2 other jurisdictions within the county then to make it happen. So what happens if they do not?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, the Capitola City Council has already voted unanimously to move forward in drafting the policy. And based on their comments from the dais, I can't imagine they're going to change their minds in the next 2 weeks. Keep in mind, the city of Capitola is extremely small and only has 10 tobacco retailers in the entire jurisdiction. So that's helpful. Of course, if for whatever reason it doesn't happen, we just keep pounding away. There's other jurisdictions in the county still. It's just that there's only so much capacity at this point. So those are the 2 that we started with. I honestly feel, you don't want to count your chickens before they're hatched, but I feel very confident that we're going to get 2 more jurisdictions in the next 6 months.
And then in there was this short article in the Tobacco Control British Medical Journal, and in it you mentioned the actions of the tobacco retailers, but has been any reaction from the tobacco industry itself?
Again, I guess the question for me is that I'm not the person that they would reach out to. I assume that they would reach out to county council, they would reach out to the city manager, the city's. I have not heard, like I said, anything from the industry. We've only heard from individual tobacco retail store owners that have absolutely reached out and expressed their dissatisfaction about a lot of this issue. The good news is that we are prepared for that, and we have counter arguments for every single one of their arguments, which largely fall back on the blame the consumer response. All they really have in their toolbox is put up more no smoking signs, put out more garbage cans. And they also, and this is a very important point, they really hammer on the fact that you should really be fining and feeing people who are littering. Well, you know what? We're not going to do that. The focus here is not on the possession, the use, the purchase of these products. We are not going to recriminalize smokers. We're going to focus on the industry where the blame really should belong.
Yeah, very good point. You also mentioned something that I thought was brilliant, to get local data through the Oceanic Agency. I can't remember the exact name. How did you do that? How did you manage to get them to provide you with local data that you could use for the local advocacy? Could you provide a few?
Right. So of course that wasn't data that we requested in any way, although I will say that one of the lead researchers on that paper was a part of our Tobacco Education Coalition. So this was the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. They were doing a research study anyway that looked at 5 years of the trash found on the shores of the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. And for better or worse, what they found out was that 24.5% of that waste was tobacco waste. The timing of it couldn't have been more perfect, because that study was in 2023, just as we were moving forward with our first policy. So it was just kismet. It was great. The other policy was the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And that study was about finding microplastics in every level of the water column, again, in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which we like to think is one of the cleanest, safest, most protected pieces of ocean along the California coast. That study made us sort of change our language a little bit about how we talk about cigarette filters and start to talk about how them being microfiber plastic waste. So whenever we get new information, we adjust, we shift a little bit. But those 2 studies, again, we didn't have anything to do with that. It was just perfect timing.
And so it was really good that you included all filters, no matter what they were made of. Did you use
Exactly.
the toxicity data as well? Did that help? And was there any opposition to that argument?
No. So the toxicity issue was interesting, and that was something that Supervisor Cummings really pushed for. Supervisor Cummings was our champion in the city council, and then just as we were working on this, he got voted into the county board of supervisors, and at the same time, he got nominated for the California Coastal Commission. So there was a lot of stuff that happened right at the same time that was just a perfect combination. Um, in his work, he has really talked about the toxicity issue, about how these microplastics get into your brain, how we're actually finding them in male semen, how we're actually finding them in all of the organs of the body. So as much as you can link cigarette filters to plastic and to microplastics and to microplastic fibers, all of that is going to help support you.
But now the concern is that non-plastic filters, then if we only focus on plastics, could be excluded. So
That's why we wrote the policy the way we wrote it. And let me tell you that we took hours
really,
and hours and hours going around and around and around on that issue. And some people were concerned that that was a little too extreme. But when you actually look at the data and when you look at the history of this industry, and we had just gone through this with the flavors ban, right? We know we just passed the flavors ban in California. And what happened? Wow, overnight they came up with a non-menthol cigarette, which of course is still a flavors. We were not going to make that mistake twice. And so we were very clear. And thank you to the Public Health Law Center for their clarity around that issue.
Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
The data that she's citing about the 24% of the waste on the shoreline is very consistent across the world. The international coastal cleanups, it's about 30%. Most urban cleanups, it's about 10 to 40 or 20 to 40% of the waste that's picked up by count. And so that was important. It starts to really make sense to people that all of these data become consistent over time. And I think it's the toxicity issue. Most of the work is done in the lab. There's more research that's going to be done now in field environments. We've got some grants in San Diego to look to see that the tobacco chemicals actually do end up in our, especially in our natural reserves, for instance, and that connection between laboratory evidence of their toxicity and the contamination of the environment is underway.
You mentioned a lot of support from the constituency and then political support for the filter ban. Do you see that as a stepping stone to go further and just ban cigarette sales?
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, Endgame is a very real policy option here in the state of California. Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach have already banned the sale of all tobacco products. Other jurisdictions, particularly here in the Bay Area, are looking at Endgame. It helps us a little bit in these conversations with policymakers to say, you know what, if you get pushback from your retailers, hey, this is a compromise. Other jurisdictions are going even farther than us. So I think that I think that in this case, as Tom mentioned, this was more of an environmental argument almost than a health argument, but it's going to help us to take the next step for sure.
Great. So I'm conscious of time. I still have a lot of questions that unfortunately won't get to ask. So I'm going to give an opportunity to both of you. Tom, maybe you go first, and then Tara, to say anything or any message that you want to provide to the audience that's live, and all of those we're going to then view the recording later. Anything that I may not have asked or you've not had a chance to say today. Any last words?
I think plastic. It's like what Dustin Hoffman said in the movie The Graduate. Back 40 years ago, plastics is the issue here, and I think that resonates with people much more than tobacco use. And so I think looking at this as an environmental opportunity is going to bode for successful tobacco control policy as well.
I completely agree. And what I would add to that is youth. Youth, youth, youth. I do all areas of tobacco control, and I know what it's like standing in front of a bunch of middle schoolers who can't imagine being 40, let alone being 40 with lung cancer. It doesn't connect with them. But you show them that picture of the skimmer bird with the cigarette butt in their mouth, and it horrifies them. Youth connect to this issue. It is an absolute tobacco prevention tool. And I think the more that we can get this next generation to understand that this is an unreliable industry, if they'll do that to the environment, what are they going to do with you with your bubblegum flavored vape and all that other garbage? So absolutely, Tom.
So thank you to both of you, and really again, congratulations to Tara for making, helping making this happen in Santa Cruz. This is a first and an example for the rest of the world. And I hope that we see more communities around the world following your lead. So I also encourage everyone to check ASH's Tobacco Endgame Policy and Advocacy Training course. You can see that on the screen. You can just register for this course. Also, we have ongoing and regular webinars, so you can go to ash.org webinars to view past ones and to stay also abreast of all the upcoming webinars. So again, thank you so much and congratulations again. I know that a number of countries have asked about this webinar. Again, because of the time of the day in Europe and Asia, a lot of people will be watching the recording, but this is going to be definitely an inspiration for the rest of the world. Thank you so much and continue the great work.